happy that you are on board the old morning train here. Our next guest into the Daily Connerton Memorial Company interview chair wrote those words in a recent op-ed, and as usual, spot on. Man, I love talking to this guy. You know what? When I was his colleague in the House for a couple of terms, you know, I don't know if I quite appreciated him as much as I have since being on the airways with him in the Senate. He was always fun to listen to. But man, he doesn't just talk. He backs it up with action. And if you're saying to yourself, man, oh man, I know who this person is. I wish he were my senator. I understand, but there's a good news for you. Even if you're not his constituent, because you don't live in his senatorial district, he's still fighting for you. He really is. He fights for everyone here in the state of Connecticut. Let's welcome back Senator Rob Sampson. Senator, good morning.
Good morning, Gary.
Nice
Thank
to...
you. You're always way too kind to me, but I appreciate it very much.
That's not true. I speak of the truth, Rob. I speak of the truth.
We're all trying, and there are a lot of good people out there that share our values and are fighting, in their own way every day.
Yeah, no, it's very true. The problem is, I think some people are so disheartened that they've thrown their hands up in the air, cried uncle, and said, "That's I give up." Others are just have their head buried in the sand because they don't want to hear it anymore. They're like, I'm all tapped out. We keep fighting the fight, but there's fewer and fewer of us, as some as I just mentioned, or some even others have moved out of the state.
Right.
But listen, you wrote an op-ed. Boy, oh boy. It's posted on your website, which is www.senatorsampson.com. Talk about, it was very beautifully written. Talk about that art of victimhood.
Right. Well, I mean, the Democrat Party, as you mentioned, has moved way, way to the left over the last 20, 25 years. And, when I got elected back in 2010, I think there probably were still a couple of, relatively moderate blue dog type Democrats in the state legislature. But those folks are gone now. Almost everyone there is, at minimum, as you mentioned, progressive, and others are self-proclaimed communists. And it would be surprising, I think, to most people if they began paying attention to what happens at the Capitol more closely. And I guess my focus in that article was, one, to point out the tactics of the modern Democrat Party and how it's changed. But the other part of the article was really to wake up people that identify as Democrat in our world, to get them to realize that the Democrat Party that they ascribe to, the one that, they became a Democrat because of, is not there anymore. That the modern Democrat Party is a communist party that is promoting nothing but big government and dependence upon that government. So they naturally seek out people that are victims or will easily cling to the idea that they're victims and they need help from the government, because what better way to take control of society than to put people in a position where they feel that they need the Democrats in power to survive? What a motivator to make sure people come out for elections.
That's a great point. Let me see if you get the same response as I get, because to your point, I have said very similar things out in public, where if I'm having a conversation with somebody and somebody joins in and I'm at a public gathering or something, at a friend's house, at a party, at a social engagement, and this topic comes up, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, well those are your words from a typical Republican." That's that couldn't be further from the truth, Gary. That's not exactly indicative of our party. We're more compassionate people. We just care more about the underdog, and they'll say things like that to try to minimize my point. And I'm sure you must get similar pushback. How do you respond to that?
That's a really good question. I mean, it's a constant battle trying to point out the difference between what they might consider to be compassion and what I would consider to be exploitation. You ask victims. I mean, they take every faction they can possibly create out of our society for the purpose of dividing people into categories so that they can play them one against another. And that, as I mentioned in the article, is boils down along religion, race. LGBTQ seems to be the thing these days. You know, the Democrats immediately ran out and said, we're going to try and identify with the LGBTQ, crowd to let them know that we're on their side and we're looking to protect them from those evil Republicans, who want to take away their rights. And nothing could be farther from the truth. You know, the Republican Party is the party of civil liberties, the party of Abraham Lincoln. That's the reason why I'm a Republican. And I would defend anyone's right to live their life any way that they choose. And that includes any, LGBTQ type lifestyle. That's entirely up to an individual to make that choice, to pursue their own happiness. The difference is when the government is being used to promote an agenda, like putting tampons in boys' restrooms. I think we talked about this last time. Yeah. It's just another example. It's like, wait a second, you're trying to force that agenda on people that don't want it. That's not tolerance. That is not respecting people's freedom to choose. That is trying to push a social agenda, and that's what we object to.
You know, and I'm going to get right back to your op-ed too, because you point that out, and I just loved it so much. I actually was talking to Mary Fay a couple of weeks ago, who is a lesbian, and she, she's out. Everybody knows. She makes no secret about it. And I just said to her one day, I said, "What rights do you not have?" And she laughed. She goes, "None. I've got all my rights." I go, "Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that, we're on the same page with that. Because if you're not receiving all your rights as an American, we got to talk about that." She goes, No, not at all. Of course I have my rights. All right. So you wrote, quote, "The left now wraps nearly every debate in their ubiquitous dividing line issues of race, gender, and or LGBTQ rights to move their agenda while discouraging debate. Reasonable people who might oppose certain policies will not speak out for fear of being maligned, canceled, fired from their job, or even harassed or assaulted," end quote. Wow. There's a lot right there, and ain't that the truth? Talk about that, Rob, because that took guts to write, and it need to be said. There's a lot of truth in what you wrote, and not many people would have the guts to put that in print. But you make a lot of good points there.
Oh, thank you. And well, Gary, I don't know how much you remember from your time in the legislature, because it was prevalent then, although not nearly as much as it is now. But occasionally you'd get a bill that was written in a way that was very, very clearly targeting the debate over race relations. And even if you disagreed with the fundamental policy because it, divided people by race or treated people differently as a result of race, which for me is completely counter-American, many Republicans refuse to speak up. And a lot of this legislation just continues to pass this day. We have several bills hanging around out there right now. There's a bill that says that we are going to no longer decide what statues go on the Capitol building based on meritorious people from history, regardless of their race and gender and background, but rather we are going to establish quotas that says that there's got to be a certain number of people appearing on the Capitol building based on the breakdown of our society. Mm-hmm. And that's just absurd. What happened to recognizing people based on merit? There is a bill out there that says that we are going to establish quotas for the people that we hire in the state of Connecticut, that every state agency will have to match the racial and gender breakdown of the state of Connecticut. And it's just absurd. I mean, there are certain industries and certain areas where certainly women might be more prevalent than men. Why would we just take some perfectly qualified, exceptional female person and say, no, we have already met our quota for women. We have to put a man in there. This is how the Democrats look at people. That's how they look at the world, that we are nothing more than our superficial characteristics, that we're, a particular race and gender. And, they feel like, we're interchangeable. We're missing a, Hispanic female. Go run it right out and get one. And that's the most absurd thing. I don't think that benefits anyone. I certainly don't think it benefits the people that they are claiming to want to help. What they're doing is they are breaking us down so that we're no longer a common culture in society. And this is why there's so much division out there, so much hatred. And I think that leads to the cesspool of culture that is leading to lots of bad behavior, including all the violence, the mass shootings and so forth, that they're always up in arms about. I think it's a direct result of the culture they have created.
Affirmative action remains controversial, and I believe it's going to remain controversial in American politics. It's been the practice was partially upheld by the Supreme Court in Grutter versus Bollinger back in 2003. That was 20 years ago. While the use of racial quotas for college admissions, for example, was ruled unconstitutional in Regents of the University of California versus Bakke, which was in 1978. You see victimhood as the ranking senator on the housing committee, right? I can only imagine landlords in this state, they don't have a leg to stand on.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's just another example. The Democrats are not stupid, Gary. I think we know that.
Oh, no, right, look, sure.
There's more tenants than there are landlords. So, we should, get ourselves on the side of the tenants. Forget fairness. Forget justice. What we want to do is we want numbers. That's what we're looking for. So we're going to go out, obviously, and try and cater to the tenants at the expense of landlords. Employees versus employers. There's always going to be more employees versus employers. So let's get on the side of employees. That's the labor committee in the legislature. Day after day, more and more policy damaging to people that actually want to produce and create jobs. This is the thing. All of their policies are designed to target, so-called victims, to create factions, to divide people, all for the sake of numbers. But they forget the long-term effects of these policies because it is normally the other side of the equation that is helping to produce in our society. And that production is the source of the wealth and the quality of life that we have in America. But if you just keep pushing employers so that they don't want to provide jobs anymore, so that they don't want to run a business in Connecticut and they leave, that's not going to hurt just them. That's going to hurt the people that would be working there. Same thing.
Great point.
In the landlord-tenant situation.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There's all this victim, except of course if the employer is the state of Connecticut, which the state of Connecticut is the number one employer for the state. Rob, stay right there. We got a very short break. We're going to come right back with State Senator Rob Sampson. Stay with us.
Did you know you...
After 9 o'clock on this Monday morning, our guest this hour, State Senator Rob Sampson. Senator, you and Representative Gail Mastrofrancesco are the ranking Republicans on the Elections Oversight Committee, otherwise known as GAE. Well, Gail was on with us last week and noted how you can vote with no ID whatsoever in this state. And those who question this are labeled as hateful and intolerant, right?
I can confirm that. Yes, sir.
Oh, we can't even question things anymore. You have to be that compliant.
Yes. I mean, the Democrats have been basically dissecting the election policy of the state of Connecticut for the last decade, at least that I'm aware of, maybe beforehand. But there's been so many changes, expansions of absentee voting. We're going to vote on early voting in the Senate. It's already passed the House. And, there's constant, desire to open voting up to incarcerated individuals, to younger individuals, all the way down to 16, to illegal aliens. They're forever trying to expand access to voting. And some of that I can actually agree with. Certainly we want to make voting accessible to, people that are legitimately supposed to be voting, the citizens of Connecticut. And I'm open to modest changes to make it easier to vote. The thing about them is that they don't care about maintaining the integrity of the vote at the same time. And that's something that Gail and I work very hard at, trying to preserve the sanctity of our elections. I mean, just think about, the last several major elections in this country and just how disputed they've been, and how the average person, I think, has less trust in the outcome of elections across the country than ever before. And that's frustrating for me. And here, yet again, the early voting bill that we're going to vote on, we made significant attempts to try and work with the Democrats to come up with a compromise that everyone could support. But no, this is going to be yet another party line vote for election policy, which to me is a travesty, because if we can't agree on election policy, which is the rules of the game that we're playing, the battle over ideas is really settled at the ballot box. We ought to at least be able to agree on the rules of elections. And we can't, because most of these major policies end up being, drafted in a way that we just can't support as conscientious Americans who want to have a responsible and reliable election. And the early voting is a perfect example, because it's wide open. When people voted at the ballot box last year for early voting, I don't know that they really thought about the ramifications, or even how long an early voting period we're talking about. I'm open to 3, 4, 5 days even, but the Democrats are sticking to 14 days of early voting.
I'm glad you brought this up. I don't mean to interrupt you. I just got like 3 minutes left. I'm glad you brought that up, because listen, a couple of days, I'm not even sure I'd even be agreeable for 4 or 5 days. Election day is election day, and it's been like that for decades and decades. And for crying out loud, it's not 5 hours or 6 hours, it's 14 hours on that day. Look, a couple of days, I got to be negotiable. Okay, a couple of days, 14 days is way too much. All right, there's 30 days to go remaining in the legislative session. You've already been delivering some stem winder speeches and effectively killing anti-business bills by simply getting on the mic and asking woke Democrat questions, right? I mean, you don't accept BS responses, which is what we've always loved about you. You keep asking questions until you get answers. It must be really, it's fun to watch you make Democrats squirm, right? It really is. You do a great job at it.
Well, I appreciate you seeing that, and I try my best. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I know before a bill comes out on the floor of the House or Senate that it's already going to pass. I mean, I think it's a foregone conclusion that Democrats don't bring bills out that if they suspect they're not going to pass on the vote. But it's still important that somebody gets up and asks the right questions and makes sure that the good information is on the record. And that lately I've been asking a question that I maybe should have asked many more times in the past, and that is, can you give me a compelling reason for this policy? Why do we need this?
Right.
Just the other day, I was questioning the chairman of the Labor Committee on a bill, and she just couldn't answer that question. And I asked several times for examples of why we needed this, and she clearly didn't have any. I think it was an important moment, and if anything, I hope it prevents them from bringing other bad bills to the floor out of concern for being asked again.
This is why we need you there. Who else would really ask such a pointed question? And look at that. You caught her with her tail between her legs. Good for you. Now, granted, I mean, they probably still can pass any bill that they want to pass just because they have the sheer numbers. But Rob Sampson, thanks for being with us this morning. Keep up that fight. We need you there. And let's get an update maybe in 2-3 weeks.
Sounds great. It's always my pleasure. And thanks for having me. And thanks for all you do, Gary.
It's all my pleasure. All right. That's